man contacted me from the hospital. He was asking for help. He was asking for healing. But he wrote me on a social media platform that I don't use very much, and so I didn't see his message for 2 days. He was reaching out because he'd been in a severe accident at work, and he'd discovered Christian Science earlier that year, and we'd had one conversation about 9 months earlier. Because I didn't see the message for 2 days, as soon as I did, I wrote him and I asked, what's going on? Is there anything I can do to help? He wrote me back and he said, yes, please, I still really need help. He said that he had some surgery done. He described it as he's had some new plates and screws in him now. But he said he was being told by the doctors that he may never walk again. And if he ever did walk, at best it was going to be, a year later and maybe never the same. So I agreed, yes, I would pray for him. And one of the first things I did was share some ideas with him from the Bible, specifically from the New Testament in the Bible, from Paul, one of the followers of Jesus. And he's talking to this really diverse group of people who have different ideas about God. And he shares this concept that in God we live and move and have our being. Now, the Bible also says some other things about God's nature that helps to put that phrase into context. It says that God is love itself and that God is life itself. That means that all that God is, like vitality and strength and balance and wholeness, come from God. And that God is truth itself. So lies don't come from God. Distortions don't come from God. Again, because God is love, it means fear doesn't come from God. And if we have our life in and of God, if it's in God that we live and move and have our being, then all of these qualities and characteristics of God's nature and of the action of God or the power of God are always with us and always something we have access to, always actually something that are expressed through us. The Bible says a couple other things about God that I'll mention, which is that God is pure good, that God is the source of all that was made, and nothing was made that God didn't make. But again, that God is pure good, so that all that was made must be like God, must be good, must be like life, must be like love. So the implications of that, though, are what we really honed in on. The man is in a hospital room and he's facing what feels like real tragedy. So on the one hand, there's this idea that it's in God we live and move and have our being. And on the other hand, it looks like his being and his movement is completely impacted by tragedy and by an accident. He was worried too, not just about his own well-being, but about the well-being of his family. He was the only one who worked in his family, and his wife and his kids depended on his income. He didn't know how they were going to make ends meet if something didn't change. Well, as we shared these ideas about what God is and about what that means for him, one other idea came to mind, something also from Paul in the Bible, that nothing can separate us from the love of God. We reasoned that that tragedy or accident couldn't separate him from his source of his strength, his ability to move forward, his ability to be free. His connection to God was unsevered, which means his connection to his source of all of that good was unsevered. What happened was the very next day, he sent me a message and he said, I got up and I walked across the room and I sat in a chair. He said, the doctors can't believe it. The next day he wrote me again and he said, I got up again today and I walked around. And on the fourth day, he said that his improvement had been so rapid, they were going to move him out of the intensive care area into the rehab area. I asked him why, and he said, well, even though there's been a lot of progress, there's still some important things that need to come together the right way. And we talked about how the whole premise of what we were doing was not getting from a bad situation to a good situation, but actually discovering that nothing could or ever had separated him from the good that was there. So he wasn't going somewhere to continue to improve. It was more about grace. And grace is a word in the Bible that really comes through in the life of Jesus. Grace, in a short phrase, you could say means the unearned love of God. Why is it unearned? Well, because it's already true. It's already there. The idea that what God is and the good that God gives is freely given for every single one of us. It's not something we earn or work our way up to. It's not something that can be broken or that we can be cut off from. Whatever it was that he needed and that his family needed, the flow of that good, the source of that good was always there. And he could feel that. That is exactly what was the process, if you will. Not a changing of something as much as a discovering of something that was already his. Well, he wrote me back at the end of the day and he said, actually, they're not going to send me to rehab. They're sending me home. They feel like I'm in a good enough state to do that now. The last day we were in touch, until I wrote him and asked if I could share his story, he wrote me a simple few sentences. He said, "No pain. All I'm feeling right now is love. I can't explain it. I just want to feel like this every day." Well, that's a story that's a conversation starter. It's a story to help us begin to reason together. What is healing? How does it happen? What is the role of prayer in all of that? And that's exactly what Christian Science is for. Christian Science is about understanding our relationship with God in a way that demystifies the concept of healing. Why? Because healing is the natural outgrowth of what it means to know God. As Jesus' life exemplified, he didn't just talk about God and talk about God's kingdom and how to think and how to live. He proved the effect of that kind of living and that kind of understanding. And what's more, he asked those who followed him to do the same thing. And they did. And there's a history of that in the Christian movement for many years afterward, of genuine healing, of people's lives restored, of people's lives transformed, people who are off track, finding their way back to a life that is useful and good and productive and kind, that is selfless. It can feel pretty far off from where we are today. It can feel like a mystery. It can feel like something we just have to say, I don't understand, whether it's the suffering of humanity or the good stuff that seems to happen sometimes and feel like a miracle. But Christian Science says that what we're doing is pulling off traditional beliefs or opinions or surface level appearances, getting past denomination, getting past anything that feels like a particular club or what anyone else ever said about it, and just really getting back to that original Christianity, that deep dive look at what Jesus lived and what he taught and how he showed others to do the same thing. It's about saying there is a science to this, and to say that there's a science to it is to say that the truth at the heart of Jesus' life and his teachings must always be true. If it's a science, it must be universal and it must be timeless, just like a mathematical fact. It doesn't come and go. It doesn't apply to some people over other people. And time doesn't have anything to do with it. It just either is or it isn't. It's about getting past any sense of there being an intermediary, any other person or any other institution or anything that feels like it's between us and God. So how did that healing happen? Well, prayer was a big part of it. And what is prayer? What does Christian Science show us about prayer? Well, Christian Science helps us look right at the example of Jesus, and something that we see there is Jesus' disciples come to him and they ask him a similar question. What is prayer? How do we pray? And according to this particular account in the Bible, Jesus' response is, first, go into your closet. Meaning prayer is not about a show for other people. It's about what's going on in our hearts. It's about what's going on in our thinking. So, okay, first step of prayer, get beyond the surface appearance of things. What else did Jesus say? Well, he gave right after that what many Christians today call the Lord's Prayer. And if we were to sum it up a little bit, we could say that Jesus in the Lord's Prayer talks about God's nature, about our nature, and about what all that means for us in our lives. So broad brushstroke, prayer can be taking a step back from the surface appearance of things and instead getting focused on the nature of God and on our relationship with God. Well, we've talked a little bit about what God is as life and truth and love. We could talk about God as the principle of the universe, that is the source of all real law, of all that governs the natural order of things. We could talk about God as the source of all intelligence, all right ideas, all intuition that's good, all wisdom that leads us forward and helps us get along well and make progress in humanity, make discoveries that better humanity and make things more comfortable and fair and so forth. All that is beautiful, all that is inspired, all that is soulful, the true identity of every one of us, all coming from this source. So if prayer is about taking a step back from the surface and getting focused on the nature of God, that gives us a little bit of an idea of what God is. But what's that last part? Our relationship with God. Talked about that a little in the first story too, and we're going to circle back to connect these dots there. But what is our relationship with God, and how does that have an impact in our lives? The first thing the Bible says about any one of us is that we're made in the very likeness of God. Jesus reiterates the similar idea when he says, "Be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." And Paul, again, one of his followers, said, "Put off the old man," that is the old sense of yourself, "and put on the new man, a new sense of yourself, which is created to be like God." This idea of being like God, of coming from God, of having all that God is built into our nature. Well, of course, you got to know something about God in order then to know something about ourselves. So if God is life, that means that the strength and the balance, the harmony that is part of a life that is good is actually built into our nature. And that, again, was part of what we were discovering with that man. If God is truth, then that means that honesty and integrity are normal. If God is love, that means that kindness, fairness, peace is normal and natural. It means that we're made purposeful. It means that every single one of us has good built into us, and exclusively good. Now, I understand that that's not always what things look like. And that's really why part of our theme today is to talk about things as discovery. You've heard me use that word. Why talk about it as a discovery? Well, because all of this stuff, it can either feel like completely divorced from reality, or it can feel like, a nice faith tradition or something that you can think in order to have positive thoughts and be a positive person. And there's nothing necessarily wrong with a lot of that, but I just think it goes so much more. And I think that's what the Bible shows us. In the Bible, we see people who, when faced with war, when faced with famine or drought, when outcast from society, or when labeled as incurable and untouchable, when they're faced with these things and they pause for a minute and they turn to their highest idea of God, there's an effect that comes from that. Whatever their highest idea of God may be at the time, it leads them forward in a way where they're able to find food in the middle of famine and safety in war. They're even able to save their enemies. They find wholeness again when they were labeled incurable, and community again when they were labeled as outcasts from society. There's a cause and effect relationship we see going on in the Bible, and the Bible really, if you're to look at it big picture, you could say it is kind of the evolution of people's idea about God. It's written by many different people over quite a long period of time, people from many different walks of life, and even people who have different ideas about God. But that common thread, one of them that goes through it, is these people, as they wrestle with how things appear to be, the stuff that they're facing, the suffering, their fears, and this idea of God that stands in the face of all of that, that is different from all of that, that contradicts it and says, no, there is safety and there is power and good here and now. When they're willing to turn to that bigger idea, that's when they get a different kind of effect than what seems like the cause and effect you might expect on the surface. We all see suffering. Somebody comes from a family that for generations has suffered with a particular kind of a disease. Somebody who's been through something tragic in their life that seems to have really affected the course of their career or their friendships. There's a certain, we see that and we see the effect that it has. But in a way, I think we could still call that surface level logic. And here's just a little bit what I mean by that. If you can imagine a little math equation here, 5 plus 7 equals 12. And you also know that it then doesn't equal 57. But a lot of times when little kids are learning math and they don't understand the principle of math, all they have is a surface level logic. So they look at the 5, the plus sign, and the 7, and plus means you put them together. So they say 5 and 7 must be 57. And actually, you can imagine a kid who's approaching things that way feeling pretty incredulous when their teacher comes around and says, no, dear, it's 12. Why? Because, well, where did a 1 and a 2 suddenly come from? It just appears out of nowhere. I can see a 5 and I can see a 7. I can put them together and I know exactly what that means. Well, what if the tough stuff that humanity faces is kind of like that? We see what appears to be a cause, we see what appears to be an effect, and it seems like a perfect logic. But what if the message of the Bible is that really is a surface level logic, that like the equation 5 plus 7 equals 12, there is a principle to the way life works that can be understood, that may bring about results that seem totally in contradiction to the surface level logic, and yet if you test it, if you step by step work to understand it and to apply it to your life, and you see different results, then you can begin to know, yes, this thing people have been talking about for thousands of years is true, and it is universal, and it is understandable. The stuff that we face, we don't have to ignore it. It's not about ignoring anything. When you think about discovery as a concept, discovery, it progresses things. It progresses humanity. We think of great discoveries that we love that have moved all of humanity forward. Things like discovering human flight and cool, fun discoveries like going to the moon or putting a rover on Mars. That happens as a new concept is understood, wrestled with, and then put into action. Something that's never been done before, something that maybe on the surface looks impossible. It also has helped humanity just do things like have clean water available for the average person in their home. Discoveries better the human experience. It also betters human experience on other levels, the kind of levels that cause real difficult suffering. An example would be like slavery. Slavery is the kind of thing that as a concept was considered pretty natural throughout a lot of the world for thousands of years, certainly in my country, in the United States and elsewhere. And that institution of slavery was rooted in ideas, though. Ideas that said, this is what's normal. This is what's natural. There are literally people who are lesser human beings. And they should be slaves. Well, was that ever true? Were there ever people who were literally lesser versions of human beings than other people? No, it was never true. But as that lie was believed or that misperception was acted on, we did stuff that caused suffering for many, many people for many, many years. Oftentimes when we talk about spiritual things, people will think, well, that just feels, again, so separate from human life or divorced from real experience. And yet we can see where it's absolutely necessary, not just like permissible, but required to have the kind of breakthroughs that humanity has when we move out of an old way of looking at things and into a new way that alleviates suffering and moves humanity forward. It's indispensable, the idea that we must begin to see things from a new angle. And to me, that angle that we see in the Bible, that we see rooted in the nature of God and what that means about our lives, is the one that alleviates the kind of suffering that we're talking about. Not just the lightweight stuff, but the most difficult stuff. The stuff that otherwise is entrenched and continues indefinitely. Jesus and the Bible have a way of talking about really what's at the root of human suffering. Jesus talked about the evils that we face as lies and as a liar. Other words in the Bible are deceiver, tempter, accuser. Those are not words that connote truth. Those are words that mean a misperception of things, a distortion of things, a falsity. We can't ignore them, but the question is, how do we handle them? Jesus said, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." How do you overcome the suffering that comes from a lie or a misperception? With truth. Do you battle on its own level, the way that it appears, accept it as true, and then say, well, what do I do about that? In other words, 5 plus 7 is 57. Now, how do I do my grocery shopping? How do I do my balance my bank account? Things aren't going very well. You're not going to get very far if you begin with the false premise. But to challenge the premise that, inheriting disease is normal or natural, or that it's inevitable that we go through tough stuff and then we must lack in our lives or be unequal or suffer. That's the premise. And we can either accept it and try and solve the problem from that basis, or we can take a step back, look a little deeper, look again at what God's nature is and the fact that we can't be separated from that the 5 plus 7 that equals 12 of our lives, of the good that is built into us, into our wholeness, into our holiness, which just means our ability to think good thoughts and act in good ways and do good in this world. Nothing can break that. Nothing can prevent us from feeling that in ourselves, knowing who we are and living it and expressing it, and seeing it in others, including others that maybe really don't seem to have those qualities. In the Bible, Paul puts it like this. He says, "Now we see things imperfectly, like puzzling reflections in a mirror, but then we will see everything with perfect clarity. All that I know now is partial and incomplete, but then I will know everything completely, just as God now knows me completely." The idea is we see stuff, we see good, but we also seem to see suffering and the evils of the world mixed in. That's that imperfect vision. But Paul's saying God sees beyond that. God is beyond that, and therefore we naturally are too. That we might not see it all yet, but that we can begin to see it more and more, step by step. And that's what genuine Christian practice really is all about. In the textbook of Christian Science called Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures, written by Mary Baker Eddy, it explains the Bible. It explains how we really connect the dots between what the Bible says about the stories that we read, the experiences there, and our lives today. What does it really mean? And how do I experience that? How do I prove those same kinds of things, that same law of goodness or naturalness of God's goodness in our lives? And not just for myself, but for others. This book, again, explains that, and the last 100 pages of the book are all stories of people who found that kind of healing in their lives just by reading the book. Many times they were labeled as incurable. but they found healing and wholeness. And many times their lives seemed to be stuck in patterns of behavior or in things that were bringing suffering that then they found freedom from. But the thing that people who read this book are most excited about is this discovery that it's real. It's really real. The whole nature of who and what we are is in and of God, as the author Mary Baker Eddy puts it. This is a woman who felt she made that discovery for herself. She faced quite a bit of suffering in her own life as she was growing up with chronic illness, and a midpoint in her life where she suffered the effects of a really severe accident from which many people didn't expect her to recover. Well, as she reached out to her highest idea of God and read the Bible, she did find healing from all of those things. And at first she thought it was a miracle, but like she ultimately wrote and explained in the book, and like other people have found and then proved for themselves, there is a science to it. There is a way to see the naturalness of it, to see the universal nature of it, to see the timelessness of it. And so this book, it puts what we've been talking about, and kind of like Paul was talking about in the Bible, like this. It says, the conceptions of mortal erring thought must give way to the ideal of all that is perfect and eternal. Through many generations, human beliefs will be attaining diviner conceptions, and the immortal and perfect model of God's creation will finally be seen as the only true conception of being. So those old beliefs are falling away, and this new, truer sense is coming forward. She starts the next sentence with the word science. She's talking about the science of Christ, or this approach to the practice of Christianity we're discussing. She says it reveals the possibility of achieving all good and sets mortals at work to discover what God has already done. There it is again, just like Paul was saying, and just like that concept of grace implies, it's here, it's now, it's unearned, and we can't be separated from it, the good of God. In a way, we could say the life of Jesus is the greatest proof of that. Jesus showed us that good is real, that good is here, that good has power, that what seems like a broken life or a broken world that gets some miraculous good in it once in a while, that's like upside down, that we flip that on its head. And what we actually see is that, as Jesus put it, the kingdom of God, of good, of truth and life and love is here and now, that is reality. That is what's normal and natural, and that what we call healing is simply discovering that more for ourselves. I would say that's exactly what happened with the guy who called. It didn't look like surface level logic that he was broken. There were scans and all kinds of things that seemed to show that. And yet, the discovery of a deeper truth, something more real, more fundamental, more knowable and unbreakable, was this concept again of life in and of God, or life in and of spirit. Spirit is a word that Jesus used for God. It's a word that literally means wind or air or breath. And it gives us the sense of God being ever present, God being always with us. Even though it's not something we see on the surface, we see the effect, and it's integral to life. That what we were doing was taking a step back from what seemed like very obvious, real, tangible circumstances, and discovering the substance of our lives in and of God, in and of that spirit, that we are fundamentally spiritual. That means of God, not of our circumstances, not of the stuff that seems to surround us, not of our past history. And that was proved. Jesus showed us that the light of God that reveals this is always with us. The divinity that shone through the life of Jesus, that is the presence and the action of God that shone through so uniquely in the life of Jesus in human history, he also showed to be ever present. God is ever present, so the presence and action of God is always with every single one of us. We could call that Christ. Jesus was given the title Christ because of the way he exemplified that so uniquely. Christ is the true idea of God coming to the flesh, coming to our lives and our sense of who and what we are, even when it feels distorted, and lifting it up, showing the light and the truth of God right here, right now with us, so that we can experience that. And again, this is what Mary Baker Eddy felt she discovered as she found healing in her own life, but then turned around and took what was inspiring her, what was moving her, what was transforming her view of things, which was rooted in the same kind of stuff we all seem to start with, and showing life more in and of God. That led her to offer to help other people. Healing others is not really any different than healing ourselves, because it's not a personal power, my power, or someone else's power. It's about a discovery of the truth that is true for everyone. So whether it's mine or somebody else's suffering, if that truly is rooted in a distortion, then universal truth, God and the action of truth in our consciousness lifting us up, is the healer. And that's something that allows anybody to help anybody. She helped and healed others. And the thing is, when they felt that and got the implication for what it really means, they saw it wasn't a personal power in her or in themselves too. And they turned around and they helped and they healed other people. And again, this is kind of what Christianity has always been about, the living of it, and the way that that just naturally helps us bring harmony to our communities, to our families, bring peace, bring health, bring goodness out in the lives of everybody, as it's naturally meant to be. Mary Baker Eddy felt that all of this was something Jesus promised when he said things like, "Those who follow me will do the works that I did, and even greater." And he said that the Spirit of truth is coming and will lead you into all truth and will explain all things and will help you remember the things that I've done. For her, that's exactly what all of this is about, the Spirit of truth moving us forward. That was the great discovery, the Spirit of truth. That's what she felt she was understanding, what she was expressing in her book and in the other things she wrote. She did found a church, but the church was not a place where people go to get God. It was not an intermediary. It was just a place where people who were working this out for themselves step by step could support one another and do more together for their communities than maybe they did separately. But the point is, it's for everyone, whether you go to a church or don't go to a church. Everyone has that direct access to God, to good. She also founded magazines that are still around today. One of them is a weekly, another one of them is a monthly, where people write in, everyday people write in, and they talk about what they're discovering about God's nature, and about the healings that they're experiencing. That is the transformation in their life, or that goodness of God shining through, right where it maybe didn't even seem possible before. Just showing that this really is for everyone. If you can say one thing about this woman's character, it was that she had the humility to make that kind of a discovery and to turn around and share it with other people. A lot of times when people think about helping others, they think it comes from a personal kind of a power, or the power of some kind of an institution. But the Christian way really is almost the opposite of that. It is the recognition of a power that is ever present, that is moving all people. And it takes humility to discover that. You could say that she reasoned through everything spiritually. Whatever she faced, she was willing to take that step back, to look at things more from the angle described in the Bible, exemplified in the life of Jesus, and take her preconceived notions and her surface level judgments and say, I'm going to set that down and take this up and let this move me, let this guide me. That's what allows anybody to be the transparency for that light of God that uplifts and heals. It's a great example for every single one of us. Jesus talked about those kinds of qualities and character, and described it as meekness and hungering and thirsting after righteousness and being pure in heart. That's the stuff that sort of clears the window, if you will, that allows that light of God to shine through. All of this truly is natural. It's not about miracles. It's not about a far-off deity intervening. It's not about what's unnatural or unknowable. It's about who we really are and what God really is. It's about the nature of reality coming to the surface, being seen, being understood. It's about our ability to see it and to understand it. And the fact that that is built in to who we really are. And this is exactly what Christian Science explains. It's here for every single one of us. So I'm going to respond to some questions that came to me in preparation for this talk. I'll share something with you that I often share with folks when I'm invited to speak in medical classrooms. We tend to talk about scientific method as our way of approaching and vetting, science, what is scientific, what is true. And if you think about that, what we call and consider scientific method today, in essence, it starts from looking at the surface appearance of things. It can only take into account as data that which is observable and measurable, fundamentally speaking. Is there something beyond that? If there is, and it's not able to be measured, then there has to be more to a science to really understand the nature of reality. So my example is this. Just about every sick room has some kind of like a pain chart is usually what it's called. And it usually consists of something like 5 to 10 little emojis. The first side being somebody really angry and in pain, and then the other one, somebody very happy and just fine. And the reason these pain charts exist is because we have no way of measuring pain. And so the best we've got are these little emoji charts where care providers who really deeply want to make sure their patients are doing as well as possible and are as comfortable as possible will ask them to point to where they feel they are on that pain chart. And they'll use that information in order to know what else to do to try and help the patient or like administer, medication to relieve pain. So my question to folks in these classrooms is always, well, if we don't even know how to measure pain, and that's something physical, do we have tools for measuring things like love or hate or fear or peacefulness or resentment or any of those kinds of things that we tend to classify as just like emotions? And yet, if we all think about it, they're very real to us in our lives, and they have a very real impact in how we feel. You know that if you get angry, you feel it. You feel the blood rushing to your face or something in the pit of your stomach. You also know what it feels like to feel just so full of love, that you are loved, and that you feel peaceful, that you feel content with who and what you are. But there is no way to measure that. I mean, you can ask people. You could ask people to fill out a form. On a scale of 1 to 10, how loving do you feel today? But if there are these major factors in our life, in our thoughts, that affect our well-being that we can't measure through what we call scientific method, doesn't that give us an indication that maybe there needs to be something more? Maybe what we call science in a surface level way today doesn't fully get at what's at the root of our health, our lives, and our well-being? Well, I think this is where Christian Science enters in and really gives us a good indication. We know about things like placebos, and, if you think about it, thought has a really big impact in a lot of our lives. I believed this was going to help me, and it did help me. Of course, all drug trials have to go through that, comparison with the placebo effect. But again, if you take that even further to how thought impacts our life constantly, so much of what we call the 5 physical senses are really defined by thought and not by something outward that's measurable. Take any one of those. Touch, for example. If a friend comes up who you deeply care about and puts their hand on your back, that feels good. If somebody comes up to you on on a subway or a train or walking down the street who's a stranger who you don't know, who suddenly just walks up and puts their hand on your back and rubs your back, that is a very uncomfortable and you may feel dangerous kind of a situation. It's literally the same outward action. So if the physicality of it is what determined whether it was good or bad, you'd have to say the physicality of it is exactly the same. But the thought of it is completely different, and therefore the experience is completely different. Do the same thing with hearing or taste or anything else. You have a food that you love that maybe your friends don't, but you love it because you ate it growing up. You have a music that you like that maybe another family member despises and they love a different kind of music. If it was just all physicality, then wouldn't taste buds interpret tastes all the same way and sound waves from music all the same way as either good or bad? Anything that we call physical or physical substance or ways of measuring things in a physical way, I think what it boils down to, there's a lot more to do with thought than we often give it credit for. And actually, Christian Science would say that at the end of the day, it's all thought. That what we call physicality is really just our perception of things. In other words, it's not a thing, it's a physical perception. Or materiality isn't an actual substance, it's a way of perceiving life, a way of perceiving reality. When we look through the lens of like a kind of materialistic lens or a physical kind of a lens, we see things in a certain way. And if that was actual, there'd be no way to challenge it. And what Christian Science shows us is that thought is primary, thought is fundamental. But that means also that healing comes through a change in consciousness, not something we do for ourselves. That would be back to the blind belief thing. That would be back to the just mind over matter or positive thinking approach. And Christian Science really eschews that and says, that's not healing. All that is still just one belief over another belief. Maybe a different belief than a kind of physical belief, but it's still just belief. Discovery is what we've been talking about today. And discovery is getting beyond this belief and my way and your way, and actually discovering a fundamental, universal kind of truth. It leaves room for individuality because God, the source, is infinite, and therefore there are infinite ways God's goodness is expressed individually in each one of us. But the kind of laws that govern, the characteristics of God are the same. That is, truth and its characteristics, integrity, love and its characteristics are what are built into our kind of spiritual DNA, if you will. When we go to the Bible, when we go to a book like Science and Health, the Key to the Scriptures, looking for how to heal, whether that's to find healing in our own lives or to help someone else find healing, we're engaging with universal truth. It's not about the ink on the pages. There's no magic in the paper. The power is in the ideas, the spirit of truth that is expressed in those ideas. When we go to it with a willing heart, when we go to it hungering and thirsting, really looking, then what we find is not that we're doing something with it so much as it's doing something with us. That is, the ideas are giving us new views, making us go, that is different than what I thought before. Or, wow, I don't have to be afraid anymore. If this is true, then I'm okay. Then that person who seems to be facing something that they're stuck in, actually, there is a way out. There has to be, because there's a constant flow of good. There's a law of God in operation that can be understood, that can be followed, that will bring the kind of ideas that move us forward, that move us forward into a space of feeling and experiencing wholeness and goodness more in our lives. Healing is not about working up to a place where we have personal power. It's something anybody can do because it takes meekness and humility, and it takes that engagement with truth. The beauty of these books is that they're available to absolutely everybody. Again, there's no intermediary. There's no needing to go outside of that direct relationship we have with God. And that's what these books show us. They help explain that. They help us understand it so that we can prove it too. Hopefully by now you have a sense of that it's more. But let me just touch on this too. Life is not compartmentalized. The stuff we face, because it's about consciousness, we can say is all connected because consciousness is one. Meaning, if I'm upset about something, that doesn't just apply here and then I suddenly don't feel that way in anything else. When you're having a bad day, you may meet your best friend, but whatever is really causing you to feel down is right there because it's in your thought. Whatever we're dealing with in thought is our lens. It's our lens for seeing our life. And as a spiritual sense of what life is, of what God is and who we are, is changing our perception of things, clarifying our lens and helping us really see what's normal and natural, that too uplifts everything. Anything that we would face in life that seems to include qualities that are unlike God, unlike goodness, unlike fairness, unlike wholeness, unlike peace, unlike love, right there is an opportunity to challenge those misperceptions, those fears and so on, and get the truer view. So here's just one quick example from my life. When I first graduated from university, I was looking for a job and didn't seem to know exactly where I was going to go. As I was praying about it, though, the thought came to me really distinctly, just take a month and get to know God better. Don't worry about what's coming down the road. Don't take what you're learning about God and try and use it to get what you want for the future. Just let it uplift you and uplift your views. And so I did that. And about a month later, I got an offer for a job. Here's the thing, though. The job was not what I wanted. It wasn't that it was a bad job. It was just that it was not a job I was interested in whatsoever. So I turned it down. But the thought came soon after that, like the next day, this is the job. This is the outcome of all of that prayer, of the new views that you've been getting. I wasn't real happy with that, but I did feel a kind of peace about it in as much as I felt like I know that's right. And so I knew I had to act on it because it's true. So I pursued it, but I also pursued it with the hope that that wasn't going to last. And what I needed to do to get the job first was get some licenses, some special accreditations. So I started taking the courses that I needed to do that. And I was a good student. I was doing fine, but it came to the night before the big state examination I would have to pass. And I took a practice exam and I completely failed it. I was really upset because I'd been doing a lot of hard work and I didn't really want to do this anyway. So what was I doing trying so hard when this wasn't even going to work out? I took another practice exam and these took about 3 hours apiece. And at the end, I failed that exam too. It was really unlike me. It was unlike my experience, but I just felt stuck. What is going on here? That I'm trying to do my best, trying to follow what I feel this true idea coming from God is leading me to, and yet feel stuck. And so as I prayed about it that night, the thought came to me to really let go and really, if this really was God, then I didn't have to make it happen. In fact, I couldn't make it happen. And if it wasn't God, I was going to be really kind of happy about that because I could let it go and go find a better situation. Well, the next day, as just before I left to drive in to take the state exam, I grabbed a tape recorder to play a tape. Recordings. I had about 30 hours worth of recordings that were given to me from the coursework that had all the course material that I needed to learn. So I played it in the car and I listened, but it was a 45-minute drive. So I listened a few minutes here, flipped the tape over, listened to a few minutes there, put a new one in, listened. So it was very random feeling. But when I got to the exam and I sat down, I looked at the first question and I thought, oh, I know the answer to this one. I just heard it in the car. And then I went to the next question and I realized, yeah, that's funny. I just heard that one in the car too. And I kept going, and it was all like that. Every single question was a question that I had just heard and understood better because of what I heard in the car. It was almost like I got the answer key. So I passed the test. I passed it quickly. I passed it very, very well. Well, I needed that, and here's why. When I started in the new job, it was difficult. It was a very competitive job, and competition's fine, but it was not competitive in the right ways. There was a lot of people entering into this financial industry to make money for themselves. They were there for selfish reasons, and beyond just being selfish, they were there to make money for themselves at the expense of their clients, at the expense of the people they were supposed to be helping. If you know anything about the big financial crisis that happened in 2008, it's because of exactly what was going on in my industry at that time. So it was hard facing the immorality and the pushes to just go along with the flow like everybody else was doing. And the rejection that was coming when I stood up for what was right, and people said, you'll never survive by doing it that way. But the reason that exam situation was so helpful to me was it gave me a concrete sense that, yes, this is exactly where God has led me. In other words, this is exactly where the right idea most naturally fits and where I most naturally will have my part to play and see good, be able to literally see good coming out from under all this muck and all this immorality. I don't know that I would have had the conviction to stay with the job if I hadn't had that experience. It's interesting how when we're following the true idea of God, what we need on every level comes to us and provides for us in a way that helps us take the next step and to do well and to do good at the next step. So what happened over the course of the next 5 years is I helped a lot of people. I helped a lot of people who otherwise would have been taken advantage of in the industry. And I was helped. I saw firsthand just how powerful divine truth can be when we're willing to lean on it, when we're willing to let it guide us in our actions, when everybody else says there's only one way to be successful. I did well in my job, and I did well by my clients, and I grew. I grew in my understanding of God. It's an interesting thing when we realize that prayer is not about getting what we want. It's not about having kind of a vision of the things in life that would make us happy and feel complete and good, and then using God to go get them. It's about letting the true idea of God guide us and lift us above surface level desires and wants to something better, something deeper, something that sometimes on the surface feels like a struggle, but brings about far more blessings, far more good for us than anything else ever would. So does it apply to everything? Yeah, because truth applies to everything. The principle of the universe, God, applies to everything. There's a right idea of God, Christ, leading us in each moment, whatever it is we're doing. If we're willing to seek that, if we're willing to give our consent to follow it as we find it. Another question that came in is, do I need to ask a particular person for healing? And we kind of just touched on that, but I'll just take that one step further and say, no, that's the whole point. And that's what we've been getting at, is that direct relationship with God. But at the same time, sometimes we need help. Sometimes we feel like it'd be great to have someone stand with us. And that's what happened in that first experience. Somebody reached out for help, somebody who was feeling just kind of caught in the waves of how things seemed to be, of their fears, of the pain they were facing or the predictions they were facing. And at that point, we do need fellowship sometimes. We all need a helping hand. It's not because other people have a power that we don't have, but when you reach out to another practicing Christian, somebody who's delving into these kinds of ideas and working out from them, it's kind of like one of the tools in God's toolbox. That is, God is always the healer. Truth itself is always the healer. Divine love is the healer. But as we're reaching out to those views from divine love and truth, we get ideas about, well, you know what feels right? You know what feels like it would be comforting is reaching out to this person or reading this book or going for a walk or listening to a particular piece of music. Anything that is good and that lifts our thought up to God, that takes us out of the kind of surface level muck and gives us those deeper views, is legitimate as something we can turn to as kind of a tool for helping us heal. Reaching out to other individuals like a Christian Science practitioner, which is what I do, and there are many of them around the world. People who are available 24/7 to help folks with prayer is just one of those tools in the toolbox. If that's something that would ever be useful to you, you can check out christianscience.com, look at the Find Us tab. There's a list in there under Find a Practitioner that will help you find folks who are around. Of course, there's a lot of other great resources on that website too. I'm going to wrap by just sharing 2 quotes with you. This one is from the Bible. Back with Paul again. He says, "See, now is the acceptable time. See, now is the day of salvation." So now, right now, today, not a far off thing, not later on, not something we're working our way up to, but right now is the day to discover more of our inseparable relationship from God, more of the nature of reality, more of life in and of spirit. That's salvation, because that's what frees us from what brings us suffering, right where we are. Nothing on the surface has to change. We discover what is true, and that moves us forward. And the last is back from Science and Health with Key to the Scriptures by Mary Baker Eddy. She says this: "It's possible, yea, it's the duty and privilege of every child, man, and woman to follow in some degree the example of the Master, by the demonstration of truth and life, of health and holiness." So it's for everybody, every man, woman, and child, everywhere. Nothing else other than our direct relationship with God determines that. And what does it do to follow the Master? That's Jesus. Well, we learn about what truth and life is. We demonstrate that. And what is the demonstration of that but health and holiness? Thank you so much for taking this time to think this through together, for all that you're doing to discover more about who you are, what God is, what reality is, and for the way you let that light shine through your life. You're a blessing.